Hello, everyone. Thank you and good evening, and thank you for coming to this public Zoom meeting to discuss Covanta's Title V operating permit and solid waste operating permit renewals. My name is Lee Hoffman. I'm with the law firm of Pullman and Comley, and I'm here to help moderate tonight's session. We'll begin with a short presentation from the plant about their operations and their permit renewals. We'll then open things up to question and answers, as well as public comment. If you would like to make a public comment, please use the raise hand button at the bottom of the screen, and we will do our best to get to everybody in turn. If you have a question, you can either raise your hand or you can put the question in the Q&A tab down below. Before we begin, just a few ground rules. This meeting is being recorded. It will be shared with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, and it will become part of the official public record. In addition, all participants will be muted during the presentation, but you can, as I mentioned before, either raise your hand or click on the Q&A button and ask your question in the chat box below. We will call upon commenters, and once we call on you, you'll be unmuted, and then you'll have your opportunity to ask your questions or make your comments. We do have a lot of people in the room tonight, and we want to get to everyone if possible. So after a 3-minute period for comment, your mic will be remuted, or shorter if you're done asking your question or making your comment. If you run out of time, you may, or if you don't have a chance to speak, you should feel free to submit written comments to the New Jersey DEP, and we'll explain how to do that in just a second. When you're speaking, we'll ask that you state your name, address, and affiliation, if any, for the record prior to your comments or questions, just so we know who you are. As I mentioned, you'll be limited to 3 minutes for each attendee. That way we have enough time for everyone to speak. After 2 minutes, I'll let you know that you have a minute left, and then after that, we will cut off the mic so that everyone has a chance. If you have further questions or comments, you may submit those to Essex Info Session, all one word, that's Essex Info Session at covanta.com. We will have that up on the slide at the end of this presentation, so you'll have a chance to copy that email address again. In order to be fair to everyone, we're not going to allow for the sharing of time or the relinquishment of time to other parties. They're your 3 minutes, so you get to use them, but nobody else does. We also don't have the ability to do video screen sharing by the commenters, so only spoken and written comments in the Q&A button or as you're speaking will be allowed. And then finally, while I don't expect that will be the case here, if there are any individuals who are doing anything inappropriate or threatening in their commentary, we will issue a warning, and if such conduct persists, we will reserve our rights to remove that speaker from the meeting. And so with that, I'd like to turn things over to Jack Bernardino from Covanta. Thank you again for attending.
Great, thank you, Lee. As Lee said, my name is Jack Bernardino, and I'm the area manager for New Jersey. And again, welcome everyone to our AO25 public hearing. I know everyone's busy, so thank you for carving out a couple hours with us tonight. Our agenda tonight is as follows. We'll briefly talk about the purpose of this meeting. We'll go over some details of the Covanta Essex facility. We'll go over the waste to energy process itself, and then the role of waste to energy in sustainable materials management. We'll go over our emissions performance, followed by community outreach, and then we'll finish up with questions and answers. And with that, I will pass it over to Patricia Earls, our New Jersey Environmental Manager.
Thank you, Jack. As Jack mentioned, I am the New Jersey Regional Environmental Manager and also responsible for environmental compliance at the Essex facility. So just going to describe a little bit about why we're having this hearing. So the Covanta Essex facility is an existing permanent waste to energy facility. And we are seeking to renew our 5-year Title V operating permit, which is the air permit, and our 5-year solid waste operating permit. We did submit a Title V renewal application to the New Jersey DEP on October 3rd of 2017, and it was determined to be administratively complete by the DEP on October 5th, same year. Our solid waste permit renewal application was submitted to the DEP on November 19th of 2020 and was determined to be administratively complete on January 26th of 2021. In each of these permit renewals, we are not proposing any changes to the current operation of the facility. And the New Jersey DEP is in the process of completing a thorough technical review of each of these applications, and will also consider any comments from the public for the renewals as required by AO 2021-25 or AO 25. And what is AO 2021-25 for those of you who may not be aware? On September 20th of 2021, Commissioner LaTourette of the New Jersey DEP signed Administrative Order 2021-25, outlining the DEP's expectations for applications that are expected to be subject to the new Environmental Justice Act upon adoption of the implementing regulations. So this public hearing is being held pursuant to that administrative order to allow for constructive communication between Covanta Essex, who is the applicant, and the local community. So as Lee was alluding to, you can, as well as submitting comments, you can view the permit renewal applications and our existing permits in effect at our website at www.covanta.com/Essex. The close of the 90-day comment period is going to be December 16th of 2022. So you need to get your comments to us by then. And again, you can submit comments either by email to the Essex info session, one word, at covanta.com, or by mail to the facility address shown on the slide here. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Dave Blackmore, who is the Essex facility manager. Dave.
Good evening. My name is David Blackmore. I'm the facility manager here at the Covanta Essex facility. The facility has been providing sustainable waste management since 1990, serving 22 municipalities in the surrounding region, including New York City. The facility is permitted to manage up to 985,500 tons of waste a year. We are a local employer with over half of our employees living within 15 miles of this facility. We have public meetings twice per year to encourage dialogue with the community, and we support various community events throughout the year, with our employees so far volunteering approximately 200 hours in 2022. Next. I'm going to take you for a walkthrough of the facility. So all waste arriving and material leaving the facility is weighed and the documentation reviewed at our scale house. All the trucks are scanned for radioactive material both as they arrive and depart the facility. Trucks tip their waste on the enclosed tipping floor where Covanta personnel inspect the waste for unacceptable material. Waste is then pushed into the refuse pit by front-end loaders, where the operation of 2 overhead cranes further screen and mix the material prior to feeding the 3 boilers. Waste travels down to the combustion grate, where the combustion control systems ensures high temperature combustion of the waste. Heat generated is used to create the steam that drives the steam turbine generators. In the furnace, we inject ammonia to control nitrogen oxide emissions, also known as NOx. As the flue gas leaves the boiler, we inject powder-activated carbon for mercury control prior to it entering the scrubbers. As the flue gas passes through the scrubbers, a mixture of lime and water is sprayed into the flue gas to neutralize acid gases such as sulfur dioxide and hydrogen chloride, and to cool the flue gas prior to entering the fabric filter bag house, where over 3,000 filter bags remove the particulate. As the flue gas travels through the stack, we have emission monitoring equipment that measures and records our emissions on a continuous basis. This data is posted daily on the Covanta Essex website. Next. The impact of our sustainable material management is the generation of enough electricity to power over 48,000 homes for a year. We recover over 21,000 tons of ferrous material and 3,200 tons of non-ferrous material each year. Now I'll turn it over to Joe T. to talk about the role of waste to energy and sustainable materials management.
Thank you, Dave. So thanks all for attending tonight. My name is Jyoti Agarwal. I'm Director of Environmental Programs at Covanta. And I'm going to walk you through the role that waste to energy plays in sustainable materials management in support of our transition to a circular economy. Both US EPA and the European Union have ranked solid waste management strategies in a very similar hierarchy as you see here. This waste hierarchy generally lays down a priority order of what constitutes the best overall environmental option. The least impactful and most preferred method is at the top, and the method that creates the worst impact to the environment is listed at the bottom. So clearly, if we don't make waste in the first place or we reuse materials, we'll have the smallest impact. And that's where the circular economy model is going to lead us to. The largest negative impact, as you can see here, comes from landfilling, and therefore it should be the last option. But this is where we are today as a country. Now, energy recovery is ranked after recycling and is preferred to landfilling. In the US, we have used landfills and we've done this for decades. We continue to do that today for our disposing our waste. In contrast, the European Union has issued a landfill directive that targets all of its 27 countries to landfill 10% or less waste by the year 2035. Next. Now, despite the waste hierarchy and knowing the best way to manage our waste, we do a pretty poor job in the United States. We continue to landfill nearly 2/3 of our waste, which is about 250 million tons a year. That's a very, very large number. We recycle only about 30% of our waste, and we recover energy from about 8%. This, as you can see, is in stark contrast to Europe, where policies have completely transformed how they manage their waste. Countries like Denmark landfill very little, with recycling rates close to 50%. And instead of landfilling, they use energy recovery to extract more value from the materials that they cannot recycle. The good news here is that for energy recovery, waste management in Essex County is actually comparable to Denmark. Now, if the recycling programs in the county can be further strengthened, then the county can move material up the waste hierarchy with very little going to landfills. Next. The European Union is an actual case study that demonstrates that recycling and waste to energy are compatible. And this compatibility really is to achieve goals of zero waste to landfill. And that's really the driver, the goal. So Europe's landfill directive allows countries to use economic instruments like incentives for recycling and a charge for using the landfill, like a tax. In this chart, you can see the European Commission's official stats show a steady drop from roughly 50% in landfill materials and a corresponding increase in recycling that's from nearly 28% to 50%. And you can also see a slight increase in energy recovery from 15 to 28%. Now, the US and Essex County recycling rates are about where Europe was in the year 2000. And this data shows that strengthening recycling at the local and national level can be achieved with the right policies in place. Also, when a community decides to increase recycling and keep materials out of landfills, it has to address how the non-recyclables will be handled. And waste to energy facilities provide that safe, reliable, practical solution for the non-recyclables. Next. Currently in the US, there are only two choices for waste management, landfills and waste to energy facilities. So let's compare these impacts. Landfills are a major source of man-made methane gas. It is 84 times stronger in its global warming potential than carbon dioxide over a 20-year period. So how is methane produced? When organic material like yard waste and food waste goes into a landfill, it degrades via a process called anaerobic decomposition, which means it's decomposing in the absence of oxygen. And this process produces methane gas, which then leaks into the atmosphere from the entire landfill structure. The same decomposition process also generates leachate, which is acidic and destroys landfill liners and contaminates groundwater sources. So I think we would all agree that using land to hold trash for future generations is not a sustainable use of land. Now, further, materials like metals and other recyclables that don't decompose remain buried in the landfill forever. In some instances, landfill methane may be captured to generate energy, and this is roughly estimated to be 65 kilowatt hours per ton of waste. Now, in contrast, at waste to energy facilities, they reduce waste volumes by 90%, and the residue occupies much less space in a landfill. This residue is also tested to make sure that it meets non-hazardous criteria prior to disposal. Materials like metals are recovered and recycled. This reduces the need to expend energy associated with mining and extracting metals from the earth and any associated greenhouse gases that are emitted from those processes. Now, energy recovered from these facilities is 10 times more at about 550 kilowatt hours per ton of waste. And its energy is produced on a continuous 24/7 basis and is a reliable source of energy. So it works to serve to support essential services and is a part of a community's critical infrastructure to provide power for functions like wastewater treatment. In addition to all of these advantages of material and energy recovery, another major benefit of processing waste here is avoidance of landfill methane. By directing the waste from a landfill to a waste to energy facility, we can roughly avoid 0.9 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents for every ton of waste processed. Now, this is a life cycle analysis. It's based on the global warming potential of 100 years. However, given the clean grade in the region compared to the national average, it's still a conservative greenhouse gas benefit. So what does this mean in terms of the greenhouse gas benefit? It means that in 2021, the greenhouse gas benefit for Essex County avoided emissions equivalent to those from 517 passenger vehicles for 1 year, or from burning 884 million pounds of coal. So using waste to energy as a part of a community's integrated waste management plan really means taking responsibility of our waste and not leaving it for our children to deal with. Next slide, please. And lastly, I just want to point out that the greenhouse gas benefits of diverting waste from landfills has been publicly recognized by major international bodies, including the ones I previously mentioned, US EPA, IPCC, and the European Commission, but also World Economic Forum and other independent third-party carbon verification organizations recognize these benefits. So I leave you with 3 takeaways. One is that every waste management method will create an impact. 2, there is no one waste management strategy that can take care of our waste problem. And 3, we all get to decide as a community on how to reduce these negative impacts based on which waste management strategies we choose to implement. So thanks for your attention, and Patricia will now take us through the facility's environmental performance.
Oh, sorry about that. I'm just going to turn my video on. Oh. Okay. Oh boy. I apologize. I will just continue without my video for the moment. Just want to talk about emission performance of the Essex facility. So Covanta, we work towards continuous improvement and continue to assess opportunities to decrease our environmental impacts. The slide here shows some opportunities that we took advantage of, or projects that we completed to do just that. Between 2009 and 2011, we added a low NOx system to our emission units, which reduced NOx emissions by approximately 30%. And that was a $6 million investment by the company. In 2013, we added a new metals recovery system where we included the ability to recover non-ferrous metals as well as ferrous metals, which improved our metal recycling by over 150%. And that was an $11.2 million investment. And in 2016, we installed new bag houses and voluntarily proposed new lower emission limits as part of that. The new bag houses reduced emissions by up to 90%, sometimes greater. And that was an overall $100 million investment. And just to show the emission reductions we did realize from that bag house installation, we compared annual average actual stack test results between 2011 and 2015, which was prior to the bag houses being installed, to the emissions average actual stack test results between 2016 and 2020, which represented emissions after the bag houses were installed. And we did this for mercury, lead, cadmium, particulate matter, and fine particulate matter, or PM10. And as you can see, there was a dramatic reduction in the metals emissions, anywhere from 95% for cadmium, 96% lead, 80% for mercury. And we did get some reduction in particulate matter and fine particulate matter of 64% and 47.3% respectively. So we did get a nice reduction in those emissions. Sorry. And then just to further show our emissions performance, we also compared our actual emissions to our Title V air permit limits. So we took the emissions between 2019 and 2021, and we compared those average emissions to our Title V permit limits, which are concentration limits, as included in our New Jersey DEP issued permit. And as you can see, we did it for the parameters listed here of dioxins, lead, cadmium, mercury, particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, hydrogen chloride, carbon monoxide, and oxides of nitrogen. And as you can see, the lead, cadmium, mercury were all over 96% below our emission limits. Dioxin were at 99% below our emission limits. And you can see for the other parameters, we are well below our permit limits as well. And just note that the lead, cadmium, and mercury and particulate matter, as well as NOx emissions here, represent permit limits that are more stringent than the federal limit. So just to continue on with that, I just wanted to show how our emissions compare to emissions from other sources in Essex County. So as you can see, for NOx emissions, again, that's oxides of nitrogen, Covanta is about 6% of the overall emissions in the area, with mobile sources, including aircraft, making up the majority of NOx emissions. Likewise, for sulfur dioxide, or SO2, we represent about 8% of the emissions in the area, with aircraft and mobile sources, again, making up the majority of the rest of the SO2 emissions. For PM10, or fine particulate matter, we represent about 1% of the overall emissions in the area. Again, mobile sources, as well as road dust, making up a big portion of the rest of the fine particulate matter. And then for volatile organic compounds, we are 0.04%, so very small percentage of the overall emissions. Again, mobile sources, solvent use, among others, making up most of those emissions. And again, this data was based on the 2017 US EPA National Emissions Inventory, which is the latest inventory available. And we just compared our current 2021 actual emissions to those numbers. Another effort to be transparent with the local community, we started publishing our continuous emission monitoring data online in 2021. It can be found at our website. The link is shown on the screen here. And again, you can go get each day's, I think it's available going back for several weeks, you can get the actual emission data for carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and opacity, where we show the highest 4-hour average carbon monoxide emissions for each unit each day. And we also show the daily 24-hour SO2 average, and as well as the removal efficiency for SO2. And then likewise, the 24-hour average of NOx emissions, and then the 6-minute average opacity. The numbers in the blue boxes above are the emission limits from our permit. And then you can compare it then with the actual data below. And again, all the emissions are reported as parts per million at 7% oxygen, and opacity as a percentage, and removal efficiency also as a percentage. And then our SO2 compliance, we either have to comply with the concentration limit or the removal efficiency limit. So either or, if you have low emissions, you're not, your efficiencies are going to be lower. So we are comply with that. Another topic I just wanted to mention is purple plumes. I'm sure some of you may have heard. So again, purple plumes are caused by iodine in the waste from residential and commercial generators, and even at very low concentrations can cause the plume. Iodine itself is widely used as a disinfectant in hospitals and homes for wound care, as well as an additive to our table salt to help our thyroid health. So as a practice, we do not accept iodine at the facility due to the effects that it causes, but we did experience quite a bit of these events in 2019 by iodine in the regular commercial waste streams. The combustion of the material was not dangerous to people living or working in the area, and the way we proved this was we modeled maximum ground level concentrations for the 2019 events using a third-party consultant, and we just determined the maximum worst case concentrations were over 80% below recommended exposure levels for iodine. We did end up, through quite an extensive investigation, did identify the source as residue that was in the waste stream from a local manufacturing company. So once we identified that, we diverted that waste from the facility permanently, and we have had no incidents since April of 2020. And now I'm going to hand it over back to Jack Bernardino to discuss community outreach and environmental justice. Jack?
Thank you, Trish. What you'll see on the slide in front of you in a few seconds is our environmental justice and community outreach policy, which we've had in place here at Covanta since 2011. We're very proud of this policy. Basically, it was somewhat uncommon to have a policy like this about 11 years ago. So a couple of things that I want to highlight in the policy itself is two things: is just having open two-way communication with the community. And then the other piece is always having public participation in the permitting process of anything that we're trying to do. Next slide. So it's, again, always great to have a written policy, but trying to put the policy into action is what we're going to try to show you here. So if you look on the left-hand side, again, is what Trish and Dave had mentioned, the bag house piece in 2016 at Newark, NOx controls in 2011, and then we have some processes that you see in the bottom there listed. One of them that's I'm very involved in is the Camden bag house and scrubber system. So we're still working on projects listed there below to execute parts of our environmental justice and community outreach policy. The picture there on the right, I just want to stress, is in 2020, when the environmental justice law was passed, Covanta was the only company to support the environmental justice law. There was a lot of talk from various industries about increased costs and loss of jobs. But again, as you saw with our policy, this was perfect and really congruent with our policy, so we supported it. Next slide. Uh, this slide just will show you just the various activities that we participate within the city of Newark, as well as Essex County. So I'm not going to go through all of these things, but just know that I think it was mentioned, we've got we'll have over 200 volunteer hours for 2022 as we're getting ready for a lot of our Thanksgiving events, Christmas and holiday events coming up next month. Our employees love participating in them. It gets us closer to the community, as well as forming some type of camaraderie amongst the employees. So we're always excited to participate when we can. Next slide. One of the things that we know we need to do better in is hiring local. That's something that we're always trying to strive to do better. So we've been attending various career fairs. You see the one in the middle was a reentry fair that we attended. And what you can see on the right-hand side are positions that we currently have open. There's 14 openings right now at the Covanta Essex facility in these various positions. We do have some of the entry-level ones that are not listed here, but like, for example, the back plant operator, tipping floor attendant. Those positions are typically entry-level, and they're starting at around $25 an hour with full benefits. So a lot of opportunities to hire local, and that's something we're going to do better at. Sure.
All right, thanks, Jack. And I finally got my video figured out. So thank you, everyone, for joining. And again, this is just a reminder of where to view the renewal applications, as well as existing permits, and how to submit comments to Covanta regarding the renewals.
So thank you all very much. Can we leave that slide up that has the address, just in case folks want to submit? Thank you. The written comments. And we have a couple of raised hands, and we have some Q&A in the Q&A box. So I'm going to start with Holly Cox, who has her hand raised. Holly, we're going to unmute you. And if you could give us your name, address, and affiliation for the record, we'd appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Holly Cox. I live at 1 Day Court in Montville, New Jersey. I'm a 24-year New Jersey resident. I'm not affiliated with any organization. I'm mainly a concerned citizen who is concerned about environmental justice and the climate. I'm here to ask the DEP to deny Covanta's permit for the following reasons. One, Covanta is trying to gain approval for its permits before New Jersey's landmark environmental justice law goes into effect in 2023. Two, Covanta is located in the Ironbound section of Newark, a cumulatively adverse overburden community. In fact, DEP considers the census block where Covanta is located to be adverse for 24 out of 31 environmental and health stressors. This means the protections of the EJ law unquestionably apply. As a result, Covanta must go above and beyond to reduce its emissions. Three, Covanta has had over 860 air permit violations since 2004. These include multiple instances of purple emissions that Covanta could not explain, although I did just now hear you explain them. Four, compared to all New Jersey facilities, Covanta is in the top 5 highest emitters for harmful pollutants like lead, arsenic, and mercury. 5, Covanta is the number 2 emitter of nitrogen oxides in the entire state. It is responsible for 70% of the stationary source emissions of nitrogen oxides in Essex County. 6, Covanta is the number 2 emitter of mercury in the entire state. It is responsible for 99.7 mercury emissions from stationary sources in Essex County. 7, Covanta is the number 2 emitter of hydrogen chloride in the entire state, responsible for 90.3% of hydrogen chloride emissions from stationary sources in Essex County. Thus, despite knowing that New Jersey's EJ law has been signed by Governor Murphy, Covanta is currently trying to renew its permits for its polluting plant in overburdened neighborhoods before the rules have been finalized. I asked the DEP and Governor Murphy to please deny the permits for this Covanta plant and subject it to New Jersey's EJ law, as the Ironbound section of Newark is a classic overburdened community. To conclude, when Governor Murphy signed the country's strongest environmental justice law in September 2020, He gave the NJDEP the power to deny permits to polluting facilities in communities that already face a toxic pollution burden from generations of environmental racism. So I now ask the DEP to please uphold his vision and deny these permits. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
And thank you very much for taking the time to speak up. I'm going to shift to the written Q&A. We have a question from Stephen Greenberg, who at the beginning of the presentation noted that the prior speaker said that Covanta would not make any changes. Why would they not implement selective catalytic converter technology to reduce emissions and improve safety for the community? And Michael, I think you could answer that one.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Lee. And thanks, Stephen, for the question. I think first of all, I think we'd start with the facility already performs very, very well with regard to NOx emissions. As Trish indicated, we've gone through a process of implementing what's called low NOx technology, which helps us reduce NOx emissions from existing facilities and operations. And the facility's performance is right around the level that both the Ozone Transport Commission recommended for existing facilities to address NOx emissions, particularly in those areas of the country, including New Jersey, that are in non-compliance or non-attainment with the 2015 National Ambient Air Quality Standards. And it's also in line with the EPA's recent request for comment on its own federal implementation plan for helping states reduce NOx emissions in those areas of non-attainment. And going back to sort of the slide that Trish showed, if we look at sort of our contribution, we contribute about 6%. Arguably, if we implemented SCR, we could, potentially drop that to maybe 3 or 4%. But overwhelmingly, the issue with NOx is really driven by mobile sources of emissions, transport of ozone in from other air sheds. And that's why you see the Ozone Transport Commission and the US EPA really take a multi-targeted approach to make sure that those opportunities to reduce NOx that are easiest to achieve are done first, and then sort of do it in a stepwise fashion to make sure that all sources are reducing NOx emissions, as opposed to just a source here and a source there, such as the waste energy facility. I hope that answers your question, Stephen.
Thank you, Michael. We have a hand up from Sean. I believe it's Moen, although I may be mispronouncing your name. So Sean, if I am mispronouncing your name, I apologize, but you should be unmuted now and be able to give your comment.
Good evening. I'm Sean Mullen, the Executive Director of Tri-County Sustainability. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. We're the regional hub for the 101 towns, 10 legislative districts, and 1.2 million people in Camden, Burlington, and Gloucester counties. We stand in solidarity with our friends in the Ironbound in Greater Essex County. It's clear the single best thing our municipalities and counties can do to combat the soaring costs and environmental emissions related to waste management is to implement comprehensive food waste management strategies. As part of the terms of EQT's leveraged buyout of Covanta last year, Covanta has to meet several key performance indicators, including increasing your waste to energy process by 40% by 2030. I don't see how you're able to do that and meet those KPIs as our solid waste districts are starting to execute better food waste management strategies, given that Covanta's incinerators remain the #1 stationary source of NOx and PM 2.5 emissions in both Newark and Camden, and that Covanta has not lived up to prior commitments related to bag houses. We're requesting that any application for public benefit exemptions to the new EJ law submitted by Covanta be rejected. And on a related note, we also don't think the state should exempt WT incinerators from fees collected under the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, sir. I also see a hand being raised by Carly Berwick. So we will ask to unmute Carly and let her ask her question. Ms. Berwick?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Carly Berwick. I live at 22 Fairmount Terrace in Jersey City. I've lived on the west side of Jersey City since 2002. So for 20 years, that means I've experienced what we all call the west side smell. And this is when the air blows from west to east from a variety of point sources in Newark, in Kearney, but particularly the garbage smell, and then what I call the diaper genie smell, which is that kind of covering up of a garbage smell. And presumably some of these chemicals are born on those smells as well. I'm also the parent of two soccer players in Newark, one of whom plays for the Ironbound Soccer Club, and they experience this smell during practices. As you know, there are thousands of young people, committed to playing outside, particularly soccer in Newark and in the Ironbound, and they are disproportionately impacted, not only in Newark Ironbound, but in Jersey City on the west side. Many other the prior two speakers spoke eloquently to the idea of cumulative adverse burden. It was to some degree heartening to see some of your slides on the potential environmental benefits of the plant, but the plant should not be in this community, which is one of the densest in the nation, and emitting so consistently in ways that we can both smell and not smell, which is disturbing. I also wanted to point to the fact that 6 and 8% of point source pollution is still pretty high for a single facility. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your comment. Greatly appreciate the feedback. We have several questions in the written Q&A. The next one is from Winifred Victor Hines. Her question is, but the waste management impact is a lot worse in people of color, underserved communities than more affluent and majority white communities. We deserve better. And then she asked, how did Covanta support the EJS 232 law? And so I'm not sure, Jack, if you know who should take the lead on that.
I think both of those are good ones for Mike as well.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Lee. Thanks, Jack. And thanks, Winnie, for the question. I think you bring up a really good point that frankly is an issue that the entire waste sector faces. The waste sector overall faces a historic location of facilities like ours, like recycling facilities, like many other facilities across the country that were cited in historically overburdened communities. There's really no way around that fact. However, the facility, it is where it is. Covanta was not involved in the siting of that facility. And we do acknowledge that we do have impacts in the local community. We believe that the impacts based on looking at the inventory from the National Emissions Inventory, those impacts are relatively small. And I certainly understand the point that yes, every impact is an impact, and we do have to look at cumulative impacts in communities. And we have been working with the state in terms of understanding that and figuring out, to the extent that we can, how do we operate better so that we can reduce our impacts, which is one of the reasons why the backhouse retrofit at the Essex facility was so important, because those were such significant emission reductions in the local community. So in sum, I think we all have to recognize that the facility is located in an overburdened community, but the facility does operate very well relative to its permits. We have invested in the facility to reduce impacts to the extent that we can. And the facility does, as Jyoti pointed out, serve a very important role for managing waste that's left over that comes from all of us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. We have a lot of people who have their hands raised, so we're going to shift to that for just a minute. And the next person I see listed is Nicole Miller. So if we can unmute Ms. Miller and have her ask her question.
Hello. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hello. Thank you for to the DEP for hosting this convening. Um, my name is Nicole Miller. I am a resident of Newark. I live at 268 Eastern Parkway in Newark. And for this program, we understand that Covanta is um, um, uh, a long time facility here in the city of Newark. But when we think about renewal for this application, we think about the parameters of the upcoming EJ rule, and Covanta should not be allowed to circumvent that by preemptively submitting their applications to try to get around the regulations. So for the EJ rule, decisions where the facility can avoid impact, the DEP should authorize as long as the conditions can avoid impact. And where a facility cannot avoid impact, they should be denied unless they can demonstrate a compelling interest. I'm sure Covanta would argue that there is a compelling interest in having both incineration and landfill, because a portion of the waste from the incineration is still landfilled. So there is both incineration and landfill. And I understand that for people who might live 15 miles away from the facility in perhaps Brooklyn or Livingston or Summit, might not necessarily understand what the impacts are for people who live 1 mile away from the facility. Or less, when we have NOx. I think in your chart you mentioned PM10, but PM10 does not include PM 2.5 or lower for the smaller amounts of particulate matter, and greenhouse gas does not fully articulate the health impacts of incineration on the local community. Included with that is not a consideration of the NOx. I think was mentioned in your own materials that Covanta provides.
Ma'am, you have 1 minute left.
Thank you. An entire 6.6% of the NOx emissions in this one facility, 6%. And when someone asked if you could perhaps drop that down, I think to 3%, which is a 50% reduction, that was dismissed as being too heavy of a burden. I do not think that it is too heavy of a burden, and the DEP should also consider that there are ways that Covanta can minimize and reduce its impacts, and they are not currently doing that. No matter how many trees they plant, they are not minimizing their impacts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments as well. They are greatly appreciated. We're next going to move to Zuline Mayfield. She has her hand up. If we could unmute her and give her 3 minutes to comment.
Good evening. My name is Zuline Mayfield. I'm the chairperson of Chester Residents Concerned for Quality Living here in Chester, PA. We are also host to a Covanta incinerator. They are incinerators. They are not waste to energy or resource recovery facilities. They burn. And as a result of the burn, they emit pollution into our air, our soil, and our water, the same as they do in the ironbound community. Our communities of color are over impacted, and we are suffering through the systematic process of environmental racism. I would like to say a couple of things about this process. I think that this process is very restrictive and unfair to the public. For example, if this was an in-person meeting, a person could show pictures or slides, and they could contribute that way. By not allowing the community and the public to put those things forward, they are not a part of the record. So I think that this type of a forum should be revisited and be a more fair process to the public overall. I would also like to say that incineration is the least cost-effective way of generating electricity. They are not in the business of generating electricity. They are in the business of burning trash. And as a result of that, a portion of the trash and the ash still goes to a landfill. Yes. And, they emit arsenic, cadmium, particulate matter. all of these things into our neighborhoods, into our lungs, into our body systems. And it is very destructive to a community. Not only that, because the incinerators are in our communities, there is also a devaluation of our property. So that needs to be factored in. That is an environmental justice concern. And I think that the DEP should not issue this permit based on the environmental impacts to a overexposed and an endangered community, which are our environmental justice communities. So we stand in solidarity with the Ironbound community, and we are asking the DEP to deny this permit and hold them accountable to the environmental justice law that was passed. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And we've had a couple of questions in the Q&A box and elsewhere. I just want to remind everyone that this will be available on our website at covanta.com/Essex. This presentation, including the pieces in the Q&A, it will also be part of the public record at New Jersey DEP. And I'd also like to remind everyone, just take this opportunity right now, that if you wish to provide materials, pictures, written comments, whatever, you may do so on or before December 16th by submitting them to the Essex info session at covanta.com email address that is up on the slide. And with that, just going to go back real quick to some of the Q&A. Stephen Greenberg asked, how did employees not realize they were throwing iodine into an incinerator? And I believe, Jack, you can answer that question.
Sure. Thank you, Lee. And thank you, Stephen, for the question. So that whole, the purple plume explanation that Trish had walked through, was just kind of go through that. I think David had mentioned in the process that when some of the trash is going through the tipping floor, that we're able to backblade some of the trash and do an inspection on some of the material that comes in. This particular material was actually within residual bags that didn't have markings of the material that were able to be seen. So it wasn't that they were thrown into the incinerator, but it was pushed in, and through the ability that it was in the waste coming in from a generator already, is how it got to the plant. So what we do have is cameras installed in the plant that we were able to focus in on some of the materials on the tipping floor. And we also did install cameras on the hopper feeds of each boiler. So that will also help us identify issues and things like that. So I hope that answered your question, Steve.
Thank you for the explanation, Jack. Next, I'd like to unmute Cassandra Bellevue. She has her hand raised. Ms. Bellevue, you have 3 minutes. Please give us your comments.
Good evening. My name is Cassandra Bellevue, and I'm an attorney with Earth Justice at 48 Wall Street in New York, and we represent the Ironbound Community Corporation. As we all know, the New Jersey Environmental Justice Law and in the interim AO 25 call for stronger health protective measures in permits for facilities in or near overburdened communities. Covanta's facility is located in the Ironbound, which is a vibrant, densely populated, multi-ethnic neighborhood in Newark, New Jersey. It is also an environmental justice community that hosts over 3,500 permitted facilities, including the state's largest municipal waste incinerator, port infrastructure warehouses, and many more, all squeezed into just 2 zip codes. DEP considers the census block where Covanta is located to be adverse for 24 out of the 31 environmental and health stressors under the EJ law, including all air pollution stressors such as ground level ozone, fine particulate matter, cancer-causing air toxics, all contaminated site stressors, all solid waste stressors, and many others. Covanta is in a cumulatively adverse, overburdened community, and therefore the protections of the EJ law and in the interim, AO25 apply. So Covanta must go above and beyond to reduce its emissions and not further burden this community. In order to reduce its emissions, first, Covanta needs to adopt selective catalytic reduction technology to reduce its emissions of smog-forming nitrogen oxides. Despite the reductions Covanta Essex was touting in its presentation, as far as stationary sources go, it is still the second highest emitter of nitrogen oxides in the entire state, contributing to over 70% of the stationary source emissions of nitrogen oxides in Essex County. Essex County currently does not meet federal smog standards, and the ironbound is cumulatively adverse for smog under the EJ law. Other incinerators already use selective catalytic reduction technology, and Covanta cannot continue using outdated, subpar technology that is harming the community. Second, Covanta Essex should also continuously monitor its mercury and hydrogen chloride emissions.
Ma'am, you have 1 minute left.
Thank you. As it is the second highest emitter in both substances of stationary sources in the entire state. You were talking about how you guys continuously monitor all these other types of things like sulfur oxide, but mercury and hydrogen chloride emissions should also be continuously monitored. Third, Covanta must enact a reliable system for sorting out unpermitted and harmful waste before burning it and continuously monitor pollutants that it emits, such as particulate matter. It took 1.5 years for Covanta to identify the cause of the purple plume violations, and if they had had better management practices in the first place, it would have never happened. And lastly, Covanta should ensure that its ash handling practices are as protective as possible and don't result in fugitive ash emissions. In short, Covanta must rise to the occasion and put into place the health protective standards required by the EJ law that you guys claim that you have supported since the beginning. Now is the time for you to show your support. So stop adding to the 800.
I'm sorry, that's your time. Thank you very, very much. I think you were wrapping up, but we have to just keep going to get everybody in. So thank you. We have a question in the Q&A from Margaret Wood. Ms. Wood asks, what plastics do you burn? What numbers, 3, 4, 5, 6, or vinyl? Jack, I believe you can answer that question.
Thank you, Lee, and thank you, Margaret, for your question. So one of the permitted waste types that we're able to take is type 10 waste, which is basically your municipal solid waste, which is your trash that you throw out and you put out the curb every morning. So in that event, if there's incidental pieces of folks are throwing out, if they're not recycling and there's materials in there, it would get processed. What we do not accept is that if we do get bulk materials or recyclable materials in a load of all recyclables coming in, we would reject that material. The incidental pieces that I mentioned earlier from potentially coming from a resident, yes, that may be combusted in our process.
Okay, thank you, Jack. Next, I see that Christian Noel has his hand up. So if we could unmute Mr. Noel and have him give his comments.
Hello, my name is Christian Noel. I live in Fort Lee, New Jersey. I'm an environmental science teacher in high school. And actually, I toured the facility there a few years ago before the pandemic with my AP Environmental Science class. So it was really interesting to see the process. But the thing that struck me was that, the whole kind of business model relies on a steady stream of trash, of municipal solid waste. And it's kind of, in the presentation earlier, it was kind of, the choices to dealing with our solid waste was kind of given a false, I don't know, I felt like a false option of only either waste going to landfills or waste being incinerated. And so there was a mention of increasing recycling. And I think there was, actually, I don't think there was a mention of composting. So what I'm curious about is, if Covanta has kind of shown to be taking some involvement in environmental initiatives in the community, but what has Covanta done to increase source reduction and composting? It seems that Covanta wouldn't be investing any effort into those areas because it would hurt the business of Covanta. But that's an option. Source reduction, making sure that food waste is diverted, would reduce the amount of waste that would either go to a landfill or an incineration facility. I was curious too so it was presented that, let me see here. So incineration avoids then 0.9 tons of CO2 equivalent for each ton of waste processed compared to landfilling. But I was wondering though, does this assume that there is no capture of the methane from the landfills? Because methane from landfills can be captured. So,
Sir, you have 1 minute.
okay, thank you. And so, okay, yeah. So I'm still here. I would just call on VP and Governor Murphy to reject any permits for Covanta and strive to shut down this facility as soon as possible by investing all efforts, all of our energies towards source reductions, the reduction of waste from the source, and then also through composting and recovery. And that would be our ideal solution to handling the waste. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. And so you had a question there. You also had a question in the written Q&A that said, so materials, I'm sorry, I didn't put my video back on. You had a question in the written Q&A that said, so materials that are unmarked still get burned. And I think to answer both of those questions, we can turn to Mike. So Mike Van Brunt, if you could answer those questions, that would be appreciated.
Sure. Christian, thanks for your questions. In terms of sort of the landfill and the diversion, we agree wholeheartedly that we need to get out of the landfill business and move up the waste management hierarchy. And the challenge that we have in the United States is we still are overwhelmingly reliant on landfilling. We landfill about 250 million tons of waste a year, and we are not really making any improvement at getting better at that. So we need to do all things. We need to keep our energy recovery facilities operating. We also need to invest heavily in anaerobic digestion, composting, recycling. And one of the ways that Europe has been so successful at it is by implementing, national-based policies that drive waste up the waste management hierarchy. In terms of what we are doing as a company, and I think one of the previous speakers alluded to this, but with the purchase of our company by EQT, we did step up to two goals, both of which have financial impact for the company. One of those goals is to grow our overall sustainable waste management business, which we see as everything up the hierarchy besides landfill. But then the second goal is to focus very targetedly on recycling. And recycling, increasing our recycling by 25% as a company under our management by 2025. And so that's an important area of focus for us to grow that part of our business and move up the waste hierarchy. In terms of the other questions that you had, I'm just trying to scroll through them and making sure that, okay, they're still on the open. In terms of your question about the truck traffic caused by delivering solid waste and removing residual waste from the facility, they are not currently accounted for in the charts that we put up on the slide. So that's a really good question, and certainly something that we can take back and analyze and to see what contribution the truck traffic has to the local airshed, particularly that related to our facility. I suspect it's probably going to be relatively minor given the share of our truck traffic relative to the rest of the truck traffic that's in the Ironbound, particularly what's going on the turnpike and is going down to the port, but certainly something that we can address.
Mike, thank you very much. We have a lot more hands raised than we do.
Oh, Lee, I'm sorry. I apologize. There's one other question too. You had asked about the methane from landfills and whether or not we assume that there was absolutely no capture. We actually do take into account landfill capture and landfills. Despite all their best efforts, collecting gas from landfills is very challenging to do. And the EPA estimates that even with capture systems, they can at best capture about 50 to 60% of the methane that's generated over the lifetime of the waste in the landfill.
Okay. Sorry, Mike, I didn't mean to cut you off, but thank you for answering all of those questions. Stephen Greenberg has had his hand up for a while, so I'd ask that he get unmuted and be able to provide his comments.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I asked a few questions. I just want to say I'm extremely unsatisfied with the answers. I feel like my questions were circumvented, and I regret asking them because I feel like I just gave an opportunity for us to be peddled propaganda to make Covanta seem good. So I would like to translate the answers to everyone else on this call as to how I understood them in a more straightforward and short fashion. My first question was about why they don't use the, advanced catalytic converters. Basically, our lives and health aren't worth the cost. They would only do things that they are pressured and forced to do. So that's the answer to that. Second thing is, how do they throw the iodine into the incinerators? They really just don't care what they throw in there. They only implemented controls to say they did. They would really throw anything they could get away with in there if they thought it would make them money. And overall, I would just like to comment on the tone of this presentation. It was completely unearnest. I do sales all the time. If I had a presentation like this, I'd have hung up on you guys. Used every technique that's deceitful and unearnest. I'm just going to read them off right now. I know all of them because I do this myself. You only focused on the good numbers and statistics, regardless of the relevance to the situation. Pretty much like saying gummy bears have 0% fat. We all know this, but it sounds good, so you say it anyways, even though it doesn't matter. You don't admit to any mistakes or wrongdoing, even in the instance where you threw iodine into the incinerator. That was clearly an error, but you basically were more concerned with my choice of saying through instead of pushed, and focusing on your pretty much mediocre solution to the problem going forward. I think there literally was labeled, and you used some weird speech to imply that it wasn't, even though you just couldn't see the label for some reason. And yeah, you just don't mention any of the downsides of the plants also in your presentation, even though there's obviously some downsides, we just completely ignore them as well. So everyone else did a pretty good job articulating specific points against this. I implore everyone to research it. I pray that they don't let you guys do this. You need to be stopped. I view you as enemy. I view you as dishonest people. Thank you.
Thank you for providing us with your comments, Mr. Greenberg. I see that Monica Wilson has her hand raised, so I'd ask that we unmute Ms. Wilson and let her do her comments.
Hi there, my name is Monica Wilson. I work for an organization called Gaia, the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives. I'm calling from California in solidarity with the community in Newark. And I'm here to ask DEP to deny this permit for the Covanta incinerator in Essex, although it is unclear to me whether DEP is on this call or whether this is a community outreach session. So I wanted to make several points. One is on this permit, the Covanta Newark incinerator has over 860 air permit violations since August of 2004. Covanta is in a cumulatively adverse, overburdened community, and the protections of the EJ law should and must apply. The continuous emissions monitoring systems should have already been in place for mercury, hydrogen chloride, particulate matter, and other harmful pollutants. I also want to take issue with the characterization of what the situation is with incineration in Europe. The reality is that Europe is pulling away from incineration in many ways. Denmark was mentioned as a model, but Denmark announced last year it will close many incinerators to meet the nation's climate goals. The capital of Denmark announced this year that it will not be able to reach its carbon neutral city goal because of its incinerator emissions. Also this year, Scotland banned the construction of new incinerators. So the tide is really, really turned already in Europe. Pollution from European incinerators is now being recognized as a serious problem. Biomonitoring last year around the Paris incinerator, which is located right in the middle of Paris, shows high levels of dioxins. Those tests and tests around other incinerators have found dioxin levels that exceed the EU action limits for food safety. So there's a myth that European incinerators are clean and healthy and safe. That is simply not true. Finally, on European policy, there are huge pivots.
Ma'am, you have
yes,
1
I
minute
hear you.
left.
Are you huge pivots away from incineration, both on funding, on climate, and on waste policy? So new policies include new taxes on incineration to make it more expensive in Europe. ending public funding for incinerators, removing incinerators from renewable energy definitions. Germany, Denmark, and Sweden all now make incinerators pay for their climate or for their carbon dioxide emissions under their carbon trading system. Lastly, I wanted to point out that in general, electricity produced by incinerators is more carbon intensive than that produced by conventional fuels. And finally, I just have to note that the EJ policy that was shared today was, it's absurd. Even Waste Management has a far more robust and transparent EJ policy and information on their website. So if you take the industry standard, this is totally subpar and unacceptable. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time and your comments. Next, we have comments from Rachel Davis. If we could unmute Ms. Davis's mic.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Great, thank you. I'm Rachel Dawn Davis. I'm Public Policy and Justice Organizer for Water Spirit, a nonprofit spiritual ecology center and ministry of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace, based on stolen land in New Jersey, as we all are. I'm speaking on behalf of our thousands of members for almost 25 years throughout the Northeast region, and in solidarity with our friends in the Ironbound community and surrounding areas. There is sustainable waste management. I echo many comments from earlier tonight. Tri-County Sustainability Sean Moen regarding NJDEP and residents creatively committing to sustainable food waste management and throughout the state. People affected most directly can help Covanta and your industry advance forward-thinking food policies if you wanted that to be the case. I echo Nicole Miller regarding NJDEP permit denial outright. This is not a grand effort to be inviting public discourse, as was mentioned also earlier, and it seems purposefully leaving many out versus ensuring a rounded voice is sourced. Pollutants are not even appropriately being studied, let alone shared with the most directly affected humans. No amount of NOx is okay for any person to breathe, especially those brave enough to be rearing a baby. So in gestation, these types of pollution, especially those we don't even know, are devastating to development. The internationally award-winning documentary film, The Sacrifice Zone, is centered on the ironbound of an area of most concern, intergenerationally rooted in environmental racism. As we all know, we see health effects of this wildly excessive, dangerous amount of pollution everywhere you turn, at every single stage of life, and how it affects people, and none is helpful. None actually outweigh the social and health costs, which are economic and financial, of lackluster systems of waste management. How does Covanta address the 24 of 31 health stressors to those inhaling air in the immediate and surrounding areas? As was mentioned, of course, by everyone, air knows no bounds. Why should this permit be renewed? 860 air permit violations since August of 2004. What of the spirit of the New Jersey environmental justice law that should be employed to understand the specific example, in addition to several proposed pollution creating facilities thrust upon residents and area dwellers? We urge NJDEP to ensure this permit is not renewed, and there are more forward-thinking methods that could be viable alternatives for waste management and could be wholeheartedly put into practice in the true spirit of the environmental justice law. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your commentary. Everyone should be aware that there have been some questions about the Q&A tabs. As we answer them either live or the occasional written response, you should be able to see the questions that have been answered, and they will be part of the public record that gets submitted to New Jersey DEP. With that, we do have some hands up, and I see that Nancy Zach has had her hand up for a while. So if we could unmute her mic and have her give her comments.
Good evening. I can remember when Covanta first proposed its incinerator in the Ironbound, and people realized at that time that to burn garbage was going to not help us with recycling. We were going in the wrong direction because the garbage incinerator, the garbage burner had to be fed lots and lots of garbage. And as far as watching what garbage comes in, I was here when the when the load came in from Ohio without the manifest on it. And it was dumped into the incinerator, blew up, and 40 firefighters ended up going to the hospital that day. So it's very good to hear people calling for recycling again and for composting. That's the way we should be going. We should have gone. And I think giving a permit so you can pollute is not a good idea. And I support all the other people who have called for the denial of this.
Thank you, Ms. Zach, for your comments. I see that we have Drew Curtis. His hand is up, so if we could unmute Mr. Curtis and have him give his comments.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, sir. Thank you.
All right. So I live here in Ironbound section of Newark for the past 12 years. And I can tell that my amount of respiratory issues I've lived here in large part due to the fact that we're 07105 is one of the most polluted zip codes in America. And that's where Covanta garbage incinerator is located. I really find it, I mean, if Covanta wasn't killing people because of their air pollution, it would be comical that you refuse to admit that you are a garbage incinerator. And you try to get up with these greenwashing schemes like waste to energy and everything too. But you are a garbage incineration company. I just want that to be known loudly. There are just so many issues. You've been around, as you said, since 1990. That's over 30 years. You are out of date and out of touch. Like that, there should be no reason for you to keep working. You have had 860 air permit violations since 2004. That's not good. You're not good at your job either. You're failing and you're not complying too. So there's no reason that you should be allowed to continue to operate. Y'all should be out of business. You need to update your catalytic reduction technology. You need to better monitor for mercury and hydrogen chloride. You need to do more monitoring for particulate matter and make sure there are no issues with the baghouse, which y'all were forced to install, by the way. It wasn't something that you did out of your good hearts. You have no idea like what you're throwing away too, which is why we see pink and purple smoke all the time, not just hear about it, as the presenter said earlier.
Sir, you have 1 minute.
All right. So I'm just going to close by just talking about this whole format for a public hearing. We're not even allowed to see each other and talk to each other because we're on Zoom, which I understand is okay because we are still in a pandemic, despite a lot of folks saying we aren't. So it's safer for us all to be here. But this should be a conversation, a dialogue where we act back and forth and communicate, not just being allowed to comment and then being spoken at too. That's not how you do community engagement. So first, we should have a real public hearing where there is real community engagement. And then DEP should deny any request for your permits and you all should go out of business, go back to Sweden or whatever company owns y'all now.
Thank you, sir, for your comments. Chase Johnson has had his hand up for a while. Can we unmute Mr. Johnson's microphone?
Yeah, so I had a couple of questions in the chat that didn't get answered. One, I'm deeply concerned about the fact that everything is spoken in relative terms here. Relative terms do absolutely nothing in terms of individual impact. We're talking about absolute impact. To say we are the best of the worst doesn't really mean anything because you're still the worst. In terms of overall impact of parts per million for nitrous oxide, arsenic, the particulates that you guys are all generating, there's no visibility into what levels are going to impact people negatively, but we all here know that you're well above those levels. So speaking relative terms doesn't really do anything, and I'd like to address one, why it's always in relative, but I believe we know the answer is because if you spoke in absolute terms, in terms of negative impact, you'd be well above the threshold always, even if you're well below the arbitrary amounts set by lawmakers and international bodies governing this. Secondly, I want to see how you compare in terms of kilowatt energy production to things like solar today that have a lot less of a carbon footprint. Solar is continually getting cheaper. I don't know why this community, especially with increased funding for solar projects coming out, things like the IRA, would want to renew your permit when the cost of solar and the investment going into it from our federal government and governing bodies is increasing. So if you could go into the kilowatt per hour, especially if you're going to take in all the externalities that you're putting into the community, I'd be very interested to see how much damage you're doing overall, and especially compared to solar and alternative methods. Finally, talking about things in terms of what good you're doing for the world, it's good for you and the communities that are far away on a global scale, perhaps, that this doesn't go to a landfill, even though, as others have pointed out, that might not be the case. But I feel like very few of you would want to live in the, of communities and the amount of distance that we're living in. I live across the river in Harrison. I smell you guys all the time. It's absolutely disgusting. And I think we can all agree upon that. And I don't think any of you would want to live in that area, raise your children in that area, be pregnant with children in that area, and have exposure to your family members. So once again, you're talking in relative terms that it's okay for these communities to bear that burden because of the greater good it's going to do for everyone else. I don't think it's fair to sacrifice the people that live around in this area. I'm unaffiliated. I'm currently a student at Bard's MBA in Sustainability program, and I'm just deeply concerned about Covanta claiming to be the best of the worst and having us believe that we should accept that while only talking about everything in relative terms when there are better relative options, as others have laid out here. I believe the permit should be denied, and I believe other options should be explored by the state that are more in guidance with the coming laws.
Okay, thank you for your comments. You had comments and you had a couple of questions there. I'm wondering if Mike or Jack, you could address those questions.
Surely I can start, and then Jack, please feel free to add in if you have additional information. I think Chase, you bring up a good point about sort of the relative impacts and looking at sort of what the total emissions are. But I guess my response to that is that arguably the most important thing is going back to what are the health impacts from the emissions from any facility. And then the EJ law requires us to also look at sort of cumulative health impacts. So in response to an NJDEP request in 2019, we had a third party prepare a dispersion modeling and facility-wide risk assessment in response to the NJDEP as part of the permit renewal process. That analysis found that cancer risks and non-carcinogenic risks were found to be negligible in accordance with the NJDEP guidance. And what they do is they base that analysis off of the actual emissions from the facility based off of our stack testing, which we do every year, as well as based off of the continuous emission monitoring system that's constantly monitoring emissions from the facility. And so I think that's probably ultimately the best arbiter of what are the actual impacts from the facility, tracing it not only to what the actual mass emissions are out of the stack, but then also tracing it to what the health impact is on people who are who live and work in the community. Secondly, you asked, you talked a little bit about sort of the alternatives for electricity generation. We are very supportive of efforts to advance solar installations, wind installations. They're all very important part of moving toward a future low carbon economy and getting away from fossil fuel combustion. Challenge with those, though, is we still are left with a waste management need. And so we need to also make sure that the technologies that we put in place technologies that can address waste management. A big advantage that waste energy facilities have is that we're dual purpose. We're able to not only generate electricity, but more importantly, we're able to address the waste management need for waste that are remaining after recycling. Jack, I didn't know if you had anything else to add.
No, I do not, Mike. Thank you.
Okay, in that case, we will turn things over to Sid Chan for his comments. Can we turn? Oh, very good. It looks like the mic is open.
Hi, I'm Sid Chan. I live in the Ironbound neighborhood. And I did several years ago get a chance to tour Covanta's Union facility in Rahway off Route 1 as part of a class that I was taking at NJIT. I do want to say I was very impressed with the professionalism and the quality of that incinerator. And I would assume that those that same professionalism and quality and air cleaning technologies are implemented here in Newark in the Covanta Essex facility. I do also want to point out that no matter where an incinerator is, it will always impact the community around it. There always has to be a community that is impacted by it. And if it's not our community, why should we export it to another community? That said, I do think Covanta Essex can do better. It should continue to improve air quality monitoring and air scrubbing technologies. And it should continue to be a better neighbor to the community, to support community organizations and support its neighbors and support waste reduction programs in Newark. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chen. Much appreciated. Brian Russo, can we unmute his mic, please, so that he can give his comments? Mr. Russo, are you there?
Hi, yes, thanks
Hi.
for allowing me to speak. I'm going to repeat some of the things that some of the other people said. Oh, my address is 883 High Mountain Road, North Hilton, New Jersey. I worked for a major insurance company and worked in Newark, Kearney, and a couple of the surrounding areas for a couple of years. I'm asking that this permit be denied due to it being an overburdened community. Covanta is to be adverse of 24 of 31 environmental and health stressors. It's adverse in all air pollution stressors, all contaminated site stressors, all solid waste stressors, and others. It's a cumulatively adverse overburdened community, and the projections of the EJ law apply. Covanta must go above and beyond to reduce emissions. It is over 860 air permit violations since August 2005. It's in the top 5 highest emitters for harmful pollutants like lead, arsenic, and mercury. It needs to adopt selective catalytic reduction technology to reduce its emissions of smog-forming nitrogen oxides. It's the number 2 emitter of nitrogen oxides in the entire state. It's responsible for 70% of the source emissions in nitrogen oxides in Essex County. Essex County does not meet federal smog standards. The Ironbound is a cumulative adverse for smog under the EJ rule. Other incinerators are already using selective catalytic reduction technology. It's not acceptable for Covanta to continue to use its outdated subpar technology that's harming the community. It should continuously monitor its mercury emissions. It's the number 2 emitter of mercury in the entire state. It's responsible for 99.7% mercury emissions in Essex County. Covanta should continuously monitor its hydrogen chloride emissions. It's the #2 emitter of hydrogen chloride in the entire state. It's responsible for 90% of the emissions in Essex County. It must use continuous monitors for particle matter. It must make sure there are no issues with the bag house. It must do a better job of sorting and unpermitting harmful waste before burning it. And it must continuously monitor more of the pollutants than it emits. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Russo. Next, we'd like to hear from Vanessa Thomas, who has her hand up. Ms. Thomas, are you there?
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Vanessa Thomas. I'm a senior at Rutgers who's studying environmental policy, social justice, and sustainability. And I'm also an employee at Ironbound Community Corporation, where I work on the environmental justice and community development team. First, Covanta really needs to recognize the harmful impacts that the many toxic pollutants they emit have on the surrounding community, and also recognize that those toxins, regardless of the amount, produce multiplicative effects that greatly harm the surrounding community that you operate in. Second, it's honestly horrifying how many violations Covanta has racked up, yet you put no cons when comparing your processes to landfills. For chemicals like mercury and hydrogen chloride, monitoring standards really need to be greatly increased given you're the second polluter of both in the entire state. Third, if you really value public hearings, public comments, and partnering with overburdened and EJ communities like your PowerPoint slide said, then I really encourage you to listen, not just to say you listen to commentary, but listen to hear and internalize what community members are saying. Fourth, in addition to greenwashing your processes, you quote unquote supported the EJ law, yet you voted for the economic interest to be included in the law. So that's really odd because that piece would have essentially gutted the EJ law. If you really value the community and want to play a role in the circular economy, then you'd be upfront about the cons of waste to energy facilities and be pushing for and funding alternatives for green tech for the beginning of product life cycle. But I don't think you would really ever do that because it means that your business model would be basically obsolete. So I thank you again for the opportunity to speak, and I'm going to end it sooner so that the community members can get their word in. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. We have a fairly lengthy question in the Q&A board from Melissa Miles. I'll just read it in its entirety so that everyone can hear it. It says, I agree with others questioning the validity of this process, which is not truly public, open, or accessible. I am concerned that there is not an email to send comments directly to the DEP. My questions are: one, does Covanta plan to hire more people for the tipping floor? The cameras are not adequate. Two, does Covanta Essex plan to instate continuous monitoring of PM, lead, and mercury? Three, does Covanta Essex plan to adopt selective catalytic conversion? Covanta's NOx emissions are a major issue and catalytic conversion should mitigate that. Four, is Covanta prepared to voluntarily reduce emissions of both NOx and hydrogen chloride? Covanta is a major emitter of these two pollutants, and the disproportionate burden would probably be enough for the DEP to place conditions on the permit under the EJ law. If Covanta supports the EJ law, is it prepared to voluntarily adopt those standards even before the law begins to be enforced? And I think, Jack, you might want to start off on the answer with this, and then Mike, you may want to follow up.
Great. Thank you, Lee, and thank you for the question, Melissa. Great to hear from you. I think maybe I'll take a couple points here that and I guess comments about this process that we've been following as for an open meeting, which again is we had been following the guidelines for conducting this open meeting. So if there's, I guess, questions and whatnot further, I guess not satisfied with the process. Again, I think if you're hopefully able to submit questions through the email addresses that we provided, again, we will be wrapping up and rolling up those comments over into our the DEP as well. and with our appropriate comment. So I think that's just a comment on the process. The first question about hiring more people for the tipping floor. So, we have right now staffed, I think it's 2, possibly 3 folks on the tipping floor at each time as we're accepting waste, as well as doing the waste inspections that we've seen. We do actually have requirements of X amount of inspections or throwdown inspections that we have to do on the tipping floor as prescribed by our operations plan, in addition to the cameras that we have. So, those are what we've been using. And again, keep in mind that the issue that we had last occurred in April 2020. So I think what we've got right now is working well. And again, we haven't had an issue since April 2020, over 2 years ago. And for questions 2 through 4, I'll pass it over to Mike.
Sure, thanks, Jack. And Melissa, your question on does Covanta Essex plan to instate continuous monitoring of PM lead and mercury? We're not planning to do that at this time. What we do as a surrogate for those are a few things. One is we do the stack testing on an annual basis, where we test for particulate matter, lead, mercury. And I certainly do understand that your comments are consistent with others who have raised the question, well, why can't we do it more frequently? There are things that we monitor continuously that help us determine how well our air pollution control systems are operating. So for example, the opacity readings that we have that we continuously monitor at our facility is a surrogate monitoring for particulate matter, lead and mercury. Again, with regard to mercury emissions, we have to track what our carbon injection rate is. And we also have to track things like temperature on the baghouse inlet to make sure that the air pollution control equipment is operating functionally and as well as it can be. And what the stack test is really designed to do is to make sure that we continue to be successful when the air pollution control equipment is being operated as we're required to do. It's important to note that unlike other options for waste management, we are not able to not send the flue gases to the air pollution control equipment. So anytime the facility is operating, those flue gases are going to the air pollution control equipment. So that's another way that we can ensure that we have continuous treatment of particulate matter, lead, and mercury. Your next question, does Covanta Essex plan to adapt selective catalytic conversion? We do not at this time. The facility already operates in line with what the EPA's expectations are and what the Ozone Transport Commission's expectations are for existing facilities to help address those areas of the country that are exceeding the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for NOx. We do operate an SCR facility. We have one facility in our fleet located down in West Palm Beach. It was a brand new facility that was specifically designed to implement SCR. At this point in time, we're not even sure if installing SCR would be technically feasible at the Essex facility because it would require substantial changes to the facility and its configuration. We had those challenges as it stands with installing the baghouse, and installing additional equipment would just exacerbate that. But I think most importantly is the return of the fact that it already is in line with what the EPA and the Ozone Transport Commission are expecting existing facilities to do. And that's all done with the recognition that NOx is not a problem borne by one facility or even two facilities, but by numerous sources. The cars that we drive, the trucks that are on the road, the railroad locomotives that go through the local area, all of those release NOx emissions into the atmosphere that all need to be addressed collaboratively and together. Your next question, is Covanta prepared to voluntarily reduce emissions of both NOx and hydrogen chloride? We already have reduced NOx as we reviewed through in the presentation, and hydrogen chloride. Right now, we currently operate the system, the air pollution control system, in line with what we're required to do as part of our permit. And again, it's important to sort of put those into perspective with the other sources of emissions. We are a larger source of HCl when it comes to point sources, but there's certainly other sources of HCl out there as well. And then with regard to some of the questions that have arisen about the EJ law and the timing of our responses and our permit renewal process, it is, let me be perfectly clear, it is not at all our intent to circumvent the EJ law or the requirements. We submitted our first renewal application back in 2017. The renewable application process is really set by the timing of the Title V permit process. Title V permits have a period that they're valid for 5 years. We have to submit permit applications that match up with that time period.
Thank you, Mike. Christian Rodriguez has his hand up. Want to get to all the folks who have their hand up, so let's get his microphone on.
Hey, it's actually, my pronouns are they, she, to be clear.
My apologies.
Okay. My name is Christian Rodriguez. My pronouns are they, she. Thanks so much for, I don't know if I should thank you for this type of presentations. I don't think is inclusive at all, but just to move forward, just want to say, you keep saying in 2017, you all submitted your permit. And in 2017, I actually hosted a march to your facilities in the snow with those same kids that you have posted on these slides are the same ones that march to demand clean air, because we're tired of the pollution. You say these percentages, like you're proud of those numbers, and you shouldn't be. The equation that you're painting, it's a super bad equation to an overburdened community. You negatively add to our emissions. Covanta has has over 860 air permit violations since August 2004. These include multiple instances of purple emissions that Covanta cannot explain for months until now. It took this meeting for you to now finally explain these purple plumes that I actually followed because I was afraid of what the heck was being emitted into my neighborhood. Those pictures that are going around, some of those pictures are my pictures, because it was scary to know what the heck this purple plume was blowing into our neighborhood. How do you call, it's how is that being a good neighbor? Compared to all New Jersey facilities, Covanta is the top 5 highest emitters for harmful pollutants like lead, arsenic, and mercury. How is that clean energy if these outputs are harmful to our communities? This is a false narrative you paint of yourself. You are incinerator. You are burning trash, which is incineration. Be transparent and truthful. The information about incinerations or incinerators in Europe, that crap was false. And you should be ashamed for not doing more research about that before presenting that to our community, like we wouldn't be able to catch on.
You have 1 minute.
Covanta needs to adopt selective catalytic reduction technology to reduce its emissions of smog-forming nitrogen oxide. You're the #2 emitter of nitrogen oxide in the entire state. You're responsible for 70% of stationary sources emissions of nitrogen oxide in Essex County, and you do not meet federal smog standards. And Ironbound, where I live in, where I grow food in, where I work and breathe, it's cumulatively adverse for smog under the EJ rule. Other incinerators are already using this. Why can't you? You're definitely like my #1 public enemy in my eyes. You say you haven't looked into offering composting programs. You haven't partnered with anyone. You say you supported the EJ bill, but then you ask for economic interest to be considered in the EJ law, despite the fact that we were opposing it. The community of Newark were opposing it. And that would have watered down the bill, period. There are better and more efficient ways to provide energy to an over community, and waste of energy is not. Polluting community is not, and your permit should be denied. We don't want you. The kids don't appreciate you. We don't appreciate you lying to us. The little bit of trees and gloves you provide to the community doesn't amount to the negative impact you had on us.
Thank you very much. If you have further comments, I'd ask that you submit them in writing. we have to get to other folks. So thank you very much for your comments. The next individual is Cynthia Mellon. So if we could unmute her and have her go. Thank you. Ms. Mellon? Okay, let's leave her hand up. Hopefully she can resolve whatever technical issue there is there. And we'll go to David Horan. Mr. Horan?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Hello.
I'm just curious, so as Covanta says, it's not a trash incinerator. I'm curious, would Covanta be willing to accept any sort of liability if people develop respiratory issues in the area? Surely, if you are not a trash incinerator, it should be no problem at all to commit right now to provide money and accept liability to people who would develop issues from a non-existent incinerator. Thank you.
You had put that question in the written questions as well, so we can take it off of that list. And Jack, I don't know who would be the one to answer that question.
That, and I'm sorry, I missed that on the written side.
It's a question of if I guess Michael's already turned on his camera to answer it. Okay. So I think Michael has answered the question for all of us. So go ahead, Michael.
Okay. First of all, I mean, look, people in Europe consider us to be incineration. It is. We acknowledge the fact that we're combusting the waste. And I don't think there's any way of sort of arguing that we're not. With the question about liability, the reality is, and why New Jersey DEP looked at cumulative health impacts is precisely because you can't assess impacts in the local airshed attributable to one facility. All of us are exposed to cumulative health impacts. Certain parts, and certainly the Ironbound community is one that has a history of being overburdened. We have acknowledged that and we recognize that. And we are doing, complying with our permits to the extent that we can, and as well as we can. And in fact, I think one of the questions that people raised about the number of violations that were in point, our compliance rate is over 99.9%. And if we look at the number of compliance periods that we have to comply with, this facility is extraordinarily well regulated by the department and by the state. And that's not to say that we do not have exceedances. We acknowledge that we have those exceedances. And one of the reasons why we elected to put our emissions performance data up online was to aid to that transparency. It's important to sort of recognize what the impacts are. It's also important to recognize that we exist in a community that has multiple impacts, all of which contribute to the overburden condition that's there. That we are part of the problem as well as part of the solution. But as I pointed out before, we're a very small part of that problem.
Okay, thank you.
Lee, can I just also wanted to mention something as well? I think there's been comments about the Covanta's role on composting, and I wanted to share a few things with you that, again, if we're looking for ways to move up the solid waste management hierarchy, obviously recycling and composting is included. I did want to share that we were asked by Rutgers to partake in a composting study, an urban composting study that would take place right here in Newark. Unfortunately, the grant or the project was not approved from what we found out late last year, or was it mid last year? So we actually continued, and we are working with New Jersey Composting Council. We actually just sponsored the last event that they had at the Burlington County Center over there at Rutgers. And again, looking for opportunities to see how composting, food composting, working with the New Jersey Composting Council, see how that can complement our process here. So we are looking at ways, and we are looking at composting.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Maria Lopez, who asks in the Q&A, can Covanta share what happens to the used bag houses? Don't you burn them afterwards? Trish, can you answer that?
Yeah, surely. Yeah, Maria, we do process our bags that we change out of our bag houses. We do change them out on a regular basis to ensure that they're operating optimally. We follow EPA guidance, which allows us to combust the used bags in our emission units. And, the idea is that it allows the air pollution controls to control any toxic emissions that might come out of that, which is makes more sense environmentally. So yes, we do process them.
Okay, thank you. Patricia Cortado has her hand up. Can we unmute her?
Hello, can you
Hello.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my name is Patricia Cortado. I'm a resident of Ironbound. There seems like there's a lot of secrets Covanta is holding on to, like this 860 air permit violation since 2004, or what the 1% equivalence is out of the overall emission y'all shared earlier, or the fact that Covanta's #2 emitter of nitrogen oxides, mercury, hydrogen, chloride out of the state of New Jersey. It's also very tasteless for Covanta to put responsibility to the people to sort out unpermitted or harmful waste. I quote, iodine is added to table salt. Do you know whose neighborhood you're occupying? How are we supposed to eat? Anyway, going back to the facts. The EJ law protects us from facilities like Covanta. If we did not need any protection, then the EJ law doesn't need to be as strong as it is. I wish we did not need any protection, but the Ironbound community has been fighting Covanta for decades. That is generational. This permit goes beyond the land that you're occupying, the chronic illnesses that we're subjected to. It's not fair and it's not just. Covanta's rep basically said there's no way around occupying Black and Brown communities. And so as a community member, I see what kind of neighbor you continue to be. The kind who is okay to treat the people disposable and sacrifice for the sake of the 1% overall emission and a false solution method from landfills. You continue to burn the years of our lives, the more you continue to burn waste in Ironbound in New Jersey. The bare minimum ask is how you would actually lessen your 860 air permit violations since 2004, if that's even possible. I was only 9 years old in 2004, and I'm a whole adult now. And from the looks of it, there's hope for me not to have to fight for facilities like you for the rest of my life because of the people here, the support, the leaders who are fighting against you, and the leaders that are fighting for the EJ law. You have the opportunity to move away from an outdated European model. You have the opportunity to move away from an outdated European model, a colonizer's model. Do what's right. There are better ways. And the maximum ask is to stop dumping on Newark. Thank you.
Thank you. Cynthia Mellon still has her hand up. Ms. Mellon, are you there? Can we unmute your mic?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Thank you. My name is Cynthia Mellon, and I am the co-chair of the City of Newark Environmental Commission, a position to which I was elected by my peers and appointed by our mayor, Ras Baraka. Part of our work of the Environmental Commission involves evaluating permit requests in the context of Newark's environmental justice and cumulative impact ordinance, which is the strongest in the country. We've all lived with the effects of this incinerator for far too long. Our commission was not given the opportunity to evaluate this permit request. If we had, we would have had ample grounds for denying it. Garbage incineration is a technology of the past. Finally, this is really not a hearing. It's a show by this company, which has been harming New Jersey for decades. We can't even see each other. It's impossible to tell who is part of this hearing. And I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A. Drew Curtis asked what does combust mean? And Michael or Jack, I don't know if one of you could answer that.
I think what I don't know if Mike is still on or not, but as far as combustion, I mean, I think the question which was tied into your thought of a garbage incinerator, was that you, I think, Drew, as well? We hadn't addressed that, but I think you know, for me, the connotation of incinerator means, I guess, your incinerator of many years ago of processing open burning without any type of air quality control, without any type of energy recovery. So that's why I think, you know, as part what we're talking today, that has evolved into a process of waste to energy, where combustion is thermal treatment, and that would be my view as a non-engineer as far as combustion.
Okay, and thank you very much for that, Jack.
I think there's a question here from Christian.
Yes,
that question.
There is. Why did the facility remain in operation while the purple emissions were being released when it wasn't known what was being emitted? But before you answer that, I do want to point out that it's after 8 o'clock. We were scheduled to end at 8, but we do have a couple of questions, and I think it'd be in everybody's interest if we answered those questions. So I'd ask the panel to stay on late, and let's get these answers going. So with that, if you could answer Christian's question about the purple plumes.
Thank you, Lee, and thank you for your question, Christian. So we have a prescribed procedure when we do have an exceedance. We are required to call the NJDEP hotline, warn DEP when we are aware of the exceedance, and to give them an idea and let them know a notification of what's happening. And of course, during that entire time, we are looking to end the excursion, minimize the excursion at that point. So that's the process that we have with the DEP as far as notification. And then, of course, there's a follow-up with corrective actions and whatnot as well.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Pringle, I see you have your hand up. You also have a question in the Q&A, so I assume that you just want to ask that question live. So we'll yield the floor to you for 3 minutes. Mr. Pringle? Mr. Pringle, are you there? Okay.
Sorry, I had a little trouble unmuting there. Can you hear me?
We can now, sir.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Yes, I have a couple questions. One, why are you so satisfied with doing the minimal necessary to be in compliance instead of, especially considering that you're in an overburdened community, going above and beyond and significantly reducing emissions, especially when that would be making fewer people sick in, again, an overburdened community? That's question number one. Do you want me to do one at a time or ask all the questions at once?
Sorry, I had trouble unmuting. Why don't you ask all of your questions? That'll be great.
Okay, second, whether you're complying with your permit or not, given the toxicity of so many of your emissions, lead, mercury, etc., would you oppose DEP requiring you to do more than you're currently doing? And why aren't you then already not doing that? And I'll just leave it at those two questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Actually, there's a third one. Why do
Oh.
you use the excuse of waiting until your permit is up for renewal? There's no reason you couldn't do better before a permit. DEP isn't preventing you from doing better. They're preventing you from doing worse. So why aren't you doing more sooner? And your 5-year excuse is, a very convenient one, isn't it?
Okay, thank you for those questions. Jack, you had turned on your camera after the first question, so I assume you want to answer that one at least?
Well, actually, Mike turned his on, so.
Oh, okay.
I turned mine off.
Well, would one of you like to answer Mr. Pringle's questions, please?
I can start and then Jack can.
Okay.
David, we are doing better than what we're required to do. In some cases, we do 99% better than what we're required to do by our permit. And that's for dioxin, lead, cadmium, mercury, particulate matter. When we installed the baghouse, we accepted lower permit limits that would make those requirements even more stringent. So I think it's very clear that we're not comfortable just doing the bare minimum. We routinely exceed our permit standards.
Okay. Any other answers to Mr. Pringle's questions, Jack or anybody else?
Nope. Thank you.
Okay. I see that Maria Lopez has her hand up, so I'd like to give her a chance to make her comments.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for letting me speak. And I guess thank you at least that this is an attempt at a conversation. I know that there's a long road ahead of us. I am wondering, given that EPA hasn't updated its incinerator standards since 2000 and whatever, 6, 5, in 16 years, how the impact would be if the EPA actually updated its incinerator standards. Is the Covanta in Newark the most upgraded facility? My understanding is also that the emission limits that you're claiming to be 99% or 90% below are actually a miscalculation that EPA was taking a court over. So I just want that really reflected on the record. I think it is important that you use the words incineration and not waste to energy. Waste to energy is very misleading. It makes it seem like you're mostly an electric company when we know that you're not. We know that you burn trash, you're a necessary evil. And we just want you to get more honest about that so that we can actually have a community dialogue. I don't like how initially Covanta painted the community members almost as criminals, trying to adjust our behavior and really setting ground rules that I thought were antagonistic, right? Seeing like you're going to be attacked. People have a lot of feelings, and I do think it's your job to hear people out and do your best to just make it on the record, answer technically and be respectful. I would love to see Covanta be a better neighbor, not just sponsoring football teams, but maybe you could replace the windows at Hawkins Street, so that the kids don't have to smell the emissions, or help people in Jersey City with their medical bills. There's like deeper ways that you can be a good neighbor. And I think I would just love to know if EPA actually updates its standards, if you could be better, because there are incinerators that pollute a lot less than you, that are of your size and only have about 40 violations in the same amount of time. So I think that it's important for you to just stay honest and be committed to an honest conversation and stop publishing hit pieces on the internet. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Lopez. Mike, I'm going to put you on the spot because there's a question from Tanisha Woods Azamard. I may be mispronouncing that, and it plays off of what Ms. Lopez was talking about in terms of the of the compliance history. And she says that she's a resident of Newark, invited by South Ward Environmental Alliance. Her children suffer from frequent pollutants in the air. I would like to state that I do not support Covanta and believe they should be denied by the DEP. My question is, with Covanta being frequent permit violators, yet claim their parency is for our peace of mind, what will you do to reduce your frequency of violations?
Okay, thanks, Lee. And Tanisha, I hope I said that correctly. Good question. I think first and foremost, we've heard sort of the number of 800 violations. It's important to sort of put that. That's a 17-year period that covers, and about 27% of the violations that were listed fall with what's considered affirmative defense, and that's a provision in permitting that basically recognizes that during periods of startup, shutdown, or necessary maintenance, there are periods when you will, for a momentary period of time, exceed a permit requirement. However, in order to claim that affirmative defense, we need to demonstrate that we are operating with due care, and that we did not violate our permit condition because of operator error, and that all reasonable effects were taken to minimize emissions, and the resulting emissions did not pose a threat to public health, welfare, or the environment. That's a really important thing to keep in mind. Secondly, I don't think everybody appreciates the exacting level of requirement that some of our permit conditions have. So, for example, within that list of 800, things that were include things like you failed to inspect all security fences and locks quarterly. That's maybe something we didn't document. And we had one that was we had a 1-minute temperature reading of 1135 degrees, which and the minimum requirement that we had to have was 1136 degrees. So we had a permit violation because we were less than 1 degree off of where we needed to be. We're not arguing that these are not permit violations. They are. But it's important to keep in mind too, in terms of, those permit violations do not, just because it's a violation, translate into an issue that's dangerous to human health and the environment. You asked a very good question about what we do to make sure, how do we reduce our emissions? One of the, we call them key performance indicators as a company. We have goals around all of our facilities to reduce what we call an excess emission event, which are these exact kind of events where we might exceed a permit limitation or another permit condition. After every single one that we do, we have what's called a root cause analysis process, where we bring the team together and figure out how do we address the issue that contributed to the permit exceedance, and what steps can we take to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And so that's a very exhaustive process, and we track the corrective actions that come out of that and make sure that those corrective actions are completed. So a very important process for us to make sure that we're continually to improve our own operations.
Okay, thank you very much. Want to take this opportunity to just point out that we've got 15 minutes left. We have some open questions. If we don't get to answer all of the questions, or if people have comments, again, the email address is there, essexinfosession@covanta.com. And with that, I would ask, I don't know if this is for Jack or for Mike, but Nicole Miller has asked if Covanta was interested in exploring composting, why didn't Covanta pay for the study with Rutgers when the grant request was denied?
I can answer that question. Yeah. So we
Great.
were actually, thank you, Nicole. So yeah, we were kind of surprised amongst all of us, the New Jersey Composting Council, Rutgers, and ourselves. There were actually maybe 1 or 2 other groups. It sounded like it would be a great idea. We thought we were easily going to get the project, but when it was denied, I think a lot of folks had kind of just backed off and went right over into other projects. So that's when I did run into some of the folks at New Jersey Composting Council at another event, and we said, "Hey, what else can we do?" So that has been revisited, as I mentioned, and we are, as we had met at their composting council, I said earlier this year. So there's other opportunities we are looking at. We're looking for locations right now. We're looking at even the process itself. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the details specifically, but we was using a Gore-Tex product as the cover. So we're looking for other footprints of smaller areas that could be probably easily better managed as the process itself. So yeah, we are continuing to research and go forward, and hopefully looking for the right opportunity to try this project and go from there.
Okay, thank you, Jack. We've got two questions that are roughly the same, so I'm just going to combine them. And I think this is a question for Trish. Trish, the question is, what is the community engagement process going to be for gathering the public comments? In addition, there's a note that the community is multilingual, and will people have the option to send in voice memos, and how will further notification go? In short, how does this meeting fit in with the rest of the process? And then also, how do we address the issues that are in the questions from Mr. Curtis and Chloe D?
Yeah, surely. Yeah, just so everyone's clear, this is an AO 25 public hearing that is required by permit applicants to, to hold these public hearing with the communities that their facility is in. And again, it's strictly to be between the applicant and the community, DEP. This is not a DEP hearing, so all comments do come to us directly at Covanta. And we will be creating a response to comments document as required under the procedure to address each comment that we've gotten during this meeting. That, again, we are recording this, so all comments and questions will be part of the record, and we will address them. And we will, I believe, we will be issuing that document in multiple languages. Again, I believe, Portuguese, Spanish, and English. And we are going to be making the recording available on our website, as well as emailing it to everyone, including the presentation. So so again, the DEP will hold their own public hearing once the permits, draft permits are issued, if and when they are issued. That would be when the DEP will hold their public hearing.
Okay, thank you very much, Trish. Greatly appreciate that. There was a question about purple plumes. Christian Rodriguez said, you have said that you have data that the purple plumes were not harmful, but how is that data accurate when you didn't know of the plumes yourself and had to be notified? When did folks go out to measure the ground level effects on the community? The same day, in 2 days? Jack, I don't know if that's one for you to answer.
Yeah, you know what, I'll try that, and Trish might have further details if she wants to jump in. So from what I understand, where the purple plume issue had occurred, basically on our opacity reading. So we were not, I think we were not, we were right around the opacity limit, or pretty close to it. So we knew that it wasn't, I guess at that point, knowing that it wasn't, I guess, an issue of that much higher from our opacity limit itself. So we were right there on that limit. So as we reported that, and I think is it 10%, Trish, is our limit. So we ended up doing the study, and Trish, again, I'm going to rely on you this. I know it wasn't obviously that same week, but that was done shortly after, and obviously DEP had asked for some calculations, which we did provide, but I'm not sure what it was on the timing, Trish, if you recall.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, so when these events happened, we were very much aware of what was going on, and knowing the nature of iodine when it combusts, we kind of, we knew that, we suspected that it was due to some iodine that had gotten in, fed to the boiler that was in the waste. So we were not, so we were the ones that notified New Jersey DEP of the events when they happened. And then, since they became an issue in 2019, especially, where we had several events, so we, as required by DEP, and again, something we want to do ourselves, we did the analysis where we were able to correlate iodine or opacity levels to iodine emissions. And using that data, we were able to do an analysis based on ground level concentrations of iodine. And, we were able to show the results from the worst case events were below the health thresholds that we were able to find to compare with, again, with DEP's approval of the whole process.
Okay. Thank you very much. We have another question from Patricia Cortado, where the question is, what is the numerical equivalence of Covanta's 1% overall emission? And what is this numerical overall emission of the other 99% you use to compute this? And I'm not sure, Michael, if you have the answer to that, if Jyoti, you have the answer to that, what if somebody could take that?
Can I ask Patricia if you're talking about the 99% below our permit limit, or were you talking about the 1% of the local airshed? Don't know if she's still on.
Yeah, I'm still on. No, I'm not talking about the 99%. I'm talking about the latter, the other one.
So the 1% of the local airshed?
Yep.
Okay, so that's based on what we do to calculate that, as we look at the US EPA publishes a national emissions inventory, which is inclusive of all sources in the county. So that includes stationary sources, but also mobile sources, air emission sources. And we look at what our emissions were on a mass basis for that particular year, and then compare it against what the overall emissions were for the county.
That doesn't really answer my questions. I was asking for a numerical equivalence. You gave me words.
Okay, we'll need the 1%. We'll need to, we can share that. That's no problem at all in our response to comments document.
Right, so there will be, and as we're getting to the last question, as we're approaching 8:30, we should note that as a result of tonight, we will be, Covanta will be generating a response to comments document that will be submitted to New Jersey DEP as part of the permit process. And as Trish alluded to earlier, there will, DEP, should it issue a draft permit, DEP, should it issue a draft permit, will hold its own public hearing. And I think the last questions have had to deal with, there's been a lot of discussion about concerns over harming the community health and the adverse health impacts that the proposed renewal may have. And I would ask, I'm not sure who would like to take that, but I think that should be addressed, and perhaps that's for GOT to take on. And so I'd ask her to do that.
Sure. Thanks, Lee. Can you
Yep, we
hear
can
me?
hear you.
Great. I when I presented our case about the role of waste to energy in sustainable materials management, one of the things I do want to strongly impress upon everyone is that we primarily are a materials management or a waste materials management company. And so while the impacts and the risks are being addressed by several of you, let's talk about also the amount of waste that we manage on an annual basis. Dave shared that it's close to 1 million tons on an annual basis at the beginning of this conversation. So the question is, what would happen to that material if a Covanta did not exist? In the scenario that we're faced with right now, it would likely go to a landfill. And like Mr. Chan said, that's going to impact some community. I don't deny that there aren't risks associated with every waste management strategy. We openly acknowledge that. However, we live in a world of trade-offs, and we do acknowledge that the Ironbound is heavily overburdened. And so we need to find a way to address those issues. But Covanta's performance has been beyond what the regulatory requirements are. We have continually improved our processes, from the NOx controls installed in 2011 to bag houses installed in 2016. We continue to address any issues that come up at the facility through detailed investigations so that we can provide you with accurate information. We invite you to visit our facilities, and we are also, in the interest of supporting a circular economy, which is where Europe is going, we are looking to invest and grow our material services areas by collaborating with the DEP and Rutgers University on piloting composting projects. So I think when you look at the record of Covanta, we've seen continual progress and improvement, and we believe that we are a strong supporter of your community, and we are glad that you voiced all these issues here so we can actually address them. But we believe that we are here to be part of your team to look out for waste issues for this community, and we will do our best to continue operating better. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we are out of time, but one person did get their hand up before we ran out of time. So I see Chris Tandazzo. I'm probably mispronouncing that, and I apologize, but we will unmute Chris and let Chris have the last word from the public comment section.
Hi, good night. Thank you for letting me speak. Chris Tandazzo, Layden Programs, New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. I just wanted to quickly address the point that was made recently in the comments saying that if Covanta didn't exist, what would we do with all the waste? I think that's very cynical to say. It means that your operations are heavily dependent on the waste crisis. You're heavily dependent on the generation of waste. So instead of maybe looking into how to get rid of that waste, looking into healthier ways to approaching waste reduction so that less waste goes into this waste stream, so that we're throwing less trash out, supporting more. I appreciate looking into composting, but it needs to be more heavily done. It needs to expand to other programs and policies that can support corporations into reducing the waste production that they have into these, the unnecessary waste that gets produced from their operations, from which Covanta depends on, since you need to burn trash to operate. And I think it's also cynical because currently, as we have spoken tonight, you have pointed out that you're in fact, incineration, you're burning trash to that's what you're working on. And I don't think that should be considered a renewable energy resource. That would mean that the renewable energy source claimed here that you are needing to operate would be waste. So that means that in order for you to continue to exist in the long term, you would need waste to continue to exist. And I think we're trying to divert from that. We're trying to have less waste go into anywhere. And I think the operations should shift towards something like that. And by labeling yourself as a renewable energy resource, I think you're really taking up the space for actual renewable energy projects such as solar and wind energy projects. And I say specifically this because right now, Covanta, you are under the RPS program, which considers you a renewable energy resource, and you receive government subsidies, which are actually our ratepayers' money. So we are funding, unfortunately, the operations that you are doing and the operations that are harming our communities in very different ways. So I think it's important for
You have 1 minute.
Honesty. Thank you. I think it's important for transparency and honesty to use the right terminology and be honest with communities and telling them what your actual operations are doing, where your finances are coming from, and what are the loopholes that have existed in the greenwashing that's happening to have actual, community transparency, because right now that's not happening, and it would be appreciated to have that. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you very much for your comments, and we will leave it with that. So again, thank you for everyone for coming out and sharing your commentary and your questions here tonight. The other thing that I would point out once again is that there is a way for you to provide your written comments. There's an address on the slide that is right there, and you have until December 16th to do so. And so I thank everyone for coming out. Have a good night.